You know, when most of us think of Henry VIII, we picture this jolly, larger-than-life king, right? The guy who maybe just had some really bad luck with his wives. Well, the thing is, the reality is so much more horrifying. Today, we're going to peel back all that historical whitewashing to get to the real truth. We're talking about a monarch whose body was literally falling apart while he was still breathing. A man whose paranoia twisted an entire kingdom into a surveillance state. This is the story of a king who rotted from the inside out.
Yeah, this wasn't just some complicated ruler. He was, frankly, a monster. A man who, as this quote says, turned marriage into a death sentence and made the Tower of London England's most feared address. So forget the romance and power. His real legacy, it's all about terror and decay.
So let's just put that myth to bed right now. The reality, as we're about to see, was like a living, breathing horror movie. Seriously, we're talking about a man whose physical presence was so grotesque, so vile, that people, even folks in the 16th century who were used to some pretty rough stuff, would physically vomit just from being near him. So, how did he get that way? That's the story we're diving into.
All right, Section 1, the rotting monarch. To really get a grip on the monster he became, you first have to understand the man he was. See, Henry wasn't born this way. Far from it. He started out as this celebrated, super-athletic prince. But then, one single event changed everything. It triggered a total physical and psychological collapse. So picture this. The year is 1536. Henry's in a jousting tournament. He takes a catastrophic fall, and he's knocked out cold for over 2 hours. That's a serious injury. And when he finally came to, the people closest to him saw it immediately. These terrifying changes. The reasonable king they knew, he was just gone. And in his place was this paranoid, violent, completely unpredictable tyrant. This was the turning point. This is where the nightmare really begins.
And the physical fallout, oh, it was even worse. Those leg wounds he got from the jousting accident, they never healed, ever. Over the years, they just turned into these massive, foul, festering ulcers. We're talking about open sores that constantly oozed pus and blood and, well, decomposing flesh. They were literally eating away at his legs. And the smell, my gosh, the smell. It wasn't just bad, it was a physical assault on the senses. The stench of his rotting flesh was apparently so powerful, you could smell it from several rooms away. Think about that. Courtiers would literally gag. They'd hold these perfumed handkerchiefs up to their faces, and some would still actually vomit from the smell alone. Even his own doctors were disgusted by it. So while his legs are literally rotting, his weight just explodes. We're talking about him ballooning to around 400 pounds. His waist, an incredible 54 inches. His face got so swollen with fat that his eyes were just these tiny little slits in a huge head. He was essentially a prisoner inside a body that was actively destroying itself. Eventually, he couldn't even walk. He was completely immobile. Teams of servants had to use these specially made wheeled chairs and pulley systems just to get him from one room to another. And here's maybe the most grotesque part of all. As they moved him, pieces of infected, rotting flesh would just fall off his legs. They left a trail of his own decomposing body that servants had to clean up behind him with cloths and buckets. I mean, can you even imagine? Okay, so that's the physical horror. But that was only half the story. The terror he inflicted was also deeply psychological. It seems that brain injury didn't just wreck his body. It turned him into a full-blown sadist, someone who seemed to get real pleasure from making other people suffer, especially the women he chose to marry. Right. We've all heard the schoolyard rhyme, haven't we? Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But that little jingle, it hides a much, much darker reality. See, Henry didn't just kill his wives. He systematically broke them. He destroyed their minds first, turning what should have been the greatest honor in England into an absolute nightmare of pure terror. Let's just take Anne Boleyn as an example. To get rid of her, Henry cooked up this plot of pure sadism. He had her musician tortured until he confessed to adultery with her.
He had her own brother arrested and forced to confess to incest. And then, and this is just an act of supreme cruelty, he made Anne watch all 5 of those men get executed one by one, right before her own beheading was scheduled. He even delayed her execution just to prolong her agony.
And he was just as twisted with his 5th wife, Catherine Howard, who was just a teenager, by the way. He locked her up for months and played this sick psychological game. One day, he'd send a message hinting she might be pardoned. The very next, she'd get a note with graphic, detailed descriptions of how she was going to be executed. The stress was so intense that people who saw her said she looked like she'd aged years in just a few months.
Now, this kind of internal rot, both physical and mental, it wasn't contained. Henry's paranoia was like a virus. It spread from his own mind, infected his entire court, and turned England into a full-blown surveillance state. I mean, we're talking about a level of spying that would make modern dictators jealous.
And what fueled his paranoia? Well, his absolutely extreme lifestyle certainly didn't help. Get this, he was consuming something like 5,000 calories a day. That's double the recommendation for a healthy, active man, let alone a guy who could barely even move. His kitchens had over 200 people working in them, whipping up over 800 different dishes every single day. This wasn't just a big appetite, it was a symptom of a mind that was totally spiraling out of control. And his court just became this fortress of paranoia. I mean, the security measures were just wild. He slept with loaded crossbows and daggers right by his bed. He had armed guards watching him sleep all night long. He had secret passages and peepholes built so he could spy on his own court. And his distrust was so total, it got almost absurd. He had spies to spy on his other spies. He had food tasters for his food tasters. In Henry's world, nobody, and I mean nobody, was trusted. So, let's recap. We've got a rotting body, tortured minds, a kingdom gripped by fear. You'd think that's where the horror story ends, right? Nope. Not with Henry. His commitment to being a walking disaster was so complete that even his dead body managed one last, truly grotesque spectacle. Yeah, after a life of that much decay, you'd think death would finally be the end of the horror. You would be so wrong. With Henry VIII, things could always get worse. So his body was so bloated and full of gases from all the decomposition that while they were taking him to Windsor for his funeral, the pressure just built up and up and up. And then, bam! His coffin, a specially reinforced, lead-lined coffin, mind you, it literally exploded. It just burst open, splattering the king's rotting remains all over the inside of the hearse. And if that wasn't enough, when the coffin burst, some of his remains leaked out onto the road. And according to reports from the time, dogs were seen licking them up. Just let that sink in for a second. The man who claimed to rule by divine right, the guy who saw himself as God's chosen king on earth, ended his final journey as literal dog food on the side of the road. You know, that exploding coffin, it's really the perfect, most disgusting symbol for his entire reign. A corrupt force that just could not be contained. And the damage outlived the monster. The psychological and political trauma he inflicted scarred his own children for life. It destroyed huge parts of the nobility, and it left a wound on the entire nation that would take generations to heal. So when you look at all of this, it's clear Henry VIII wasn't some charismatic, flawed hero. He was a physically revolting, psychologically twisted man. And his story, it isn't just entertainment. It's a warning. It's a serious warning about what happens when power goes completely unchecked. And maybe more importantly, what happens when we decide to remember the myth instead of the ugly, horrifying reality. Which leaves us with a final question for you to think about. Why do we still romanticize history's monsters?